Hello and welcome to this ORF conversation. Today's conversation is part of a series of chats we have been having on India's China Conundrum. The idea is to speak to experts and find from them what are the possible options, doable options available to India while dealing with the big problem called China. We know what happened in East Ladakh, and in fact, the PLA continues to be stationed along the LAC in East Ladakh at various several points. The ground details we'll not go into. We will talk about policy responses. We'll talk about the problem as such, the nature of the problem, and why responses now need to be structured in a manner that they are able to that we are able to deal with China in the short term, the medium term, and long term. So they have to be linked together. They have to be structured in a manner that they help India achieve its strategic objective. We have with us today Ms. Preeti Saran. She is a veteran diplomat. She retired from the Ministry of External Affairs as Secretary East. Currently, she is a member of the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And while she was in the ministry, she was also dealing with China, with the problem that China forces on its neighbors, not only India, but also in East Asia. Uh, Preeti, would you like to make a quick comment on the situation that we face today?
Yes. The situation that we face today, you referred to East Ladakh and you said not to go into details, but to just focus on policy options. But, even to formulate those policy options, I think we should be mindful of one fact, and it is that the mask is off as far as China is concerned. And suddenly it has shown a very ugly, a very vicious side of itself. A side which certainly wants to dominate not just Asia, but the rest of the world. And the message that it's trying to convey through this particular standoff is that it will dominate, that it will not, accept past agreements that it has, adhered to for the last 20, 25 years that we have actually followed of peace and tranquility at the border through various agreements that have been signed. So this is completely in violation of all our previous understandings, of our patrolling norms, of previous practices and customs. And so really the standoff, particularly on 15th of June, really showed its very ugly vicious side. And so if we have to formulate policy options, we have to be mindful of this aspect of China as well. Because certainly, I think that was a turning point. We have so far managed our relationship. It has been a complicated relationship. It has never been an easy one, but I think we will have to factor in this particular element, this most recent element of this aspect of China as we move forward.
But why should we have been surprised by what China did? I mean, China in many ways is like the corner plot owner, constantly trying to grab land inch by inch, foot by foot, meter by meter. And this has been obvious for decades now. So why should we be surprised by this attitude, worldview, approach, call it whatever you wish to, of China? And it's not only with India. Even while they tried to transgress across the LAC in East Ladakh, they have uh, they have had trouble in South China Sea. They are eyeing Japanese islands. They have claimed a bit of land in Nepal, and now they are talking about a bit of land in Bhutan. So it goes on and on and on. I mean, it's a beast which just can't be satiated. And why should we be surprised?
No, it's not a surprise. I don't think it was a surprise. It just surprises you when all along we have maintained bilaterally that our disagreements should not become disputes. And we have all along, in spite of the salami tactics, in spite of this corner plot mentality of creeping in, we have been able to maintain a semblance of peace and tranquility, which was completely violated on 15th of June by the vicious manner of its attack. That is something that is unprecedented. That has not happened before. It's not as though we don't have soldiers on our side who are fully armed, but it's just that we have adhered to our part of the agreement, both tacit and written, which they did not. And so that is what was different from its previous behavior.
Preeti, do you think that, everybody is talking about a post-COVID world order, that the supply lines will be redrawn, the supply chains will be readjusted, new alliances will emerge, and the world will not be the same again? So, in a sense, the suggestion is that China's dominance will now begin to diminish. So, do you think that there is a link between what is being sort of uh, talked about as a post-COVID-19 world order and China's haste to sort of ensure that that does not happen? Because at a time when the whole world is dealing with the Wuhan virus, why should China want to go and unsettle people?
Well, that is really for the Chinese government and the Communist Party of China to really introspect. That has it really achieved what it wanted to by being aggressive at a time when the international community is so preoccupied with dealing with this pandemic, which in fact, incidentally, originated in their country. And already, they first refused to accept it being called the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus, completely in denial of how complicit they were in what could have been restricted to a local infection to have today become the most pernicious pandemic which has affected the world, the international community, and taken millions of lives. In fact, you can already see that they have changing the narrative by the aggressive manner in which they first refused to even accept that it be called a Wuhan virus or a Chinese virus, and the manner and the role that they have played through WHO and other organizations and other countries, with the support of whoever they can garner in preventing that narrative to actually remain forefront or prevent an inquiry for that matter, the initial stages. I agree with you, the world will not be the same again post-COVID. I think we will all first, even as I think the immediate concern of all countries would be to deal with this pandemic and then deal with the posturing and the positions that China has taken. And I completely agree with you that this particular aggression at a time the world is preoccupied with the pandemic, their behavior patterns in South China Sea, for example, they have actually increased their aggression out there and in a similar fashion. So really, they need to introspect that have they really achieved what they really wanted to, or will it in fact be counterproductive in the long term?
Which brings me back to the question, how does India deal with the China conundrum? I mean, end of the day, it's a battle we have to fight alone. I mean, we'll come to the other aspect of diplomacy and alliances later, but essentially this is a battle which we have to fight. So how do we fight it?
Well, certainly I agree that as far as the military dimension of this battle is concerned, we will fight it. And I'm very confident that we are capable of fighting and we will do it. Already the fact that we did not succumb or cow down to what was Chinese intention by stopping our normal patrolling patterns is something that I think they have understood. They have heard our leadership make it very clear that while we don't want a war, we don't want to escalate the situation, but we will not allow this kind of aggression to be perpetrated. So that's the first step. Secondly, of course, as we deal with it, we need to, of course, do some more introspection on our own part. How we can militarily deal with it, as I said, I'm very confident we can. But also there are the other economic dimensions, if there's going to be a fallout to our bilateral relations, and generally the combination of, the COVID dealing with that, our own internal economic situation, how our supply chains get impacted, our bilateral trade, investment, and other aspects of the relationship are impacted. I think we will have to be very sagacious. We'll have to be very judicious. We'll have to be wise. I don't think it helps us to take any knee-jerk reactions or take sporadic actions. I think it has to be well thought through, ultimately planned to ensure that it works to the best interest of our country. I think we need to, even as we formulate our diplomatic policies and deal with it externally, with in partnership with other like-minded countries. I think internally we need to follow an all of government of India approach. It has to be not just one Ministry of External Affairs or the Defense Ministry that deals with it. I think we need to take on board not just the central government and all ministries of the government of India, but also all of the state governments, because they are very important stakeholders in this whole China policy, in the implementation of dealing with this China conundrum. So I think that is the most important aspect. It has to well thought through strategy to ensure that it works for our best national interest.
It's often said that between war and abject surrender, there is this huge zone of coercive diplomacy. Somehow we have not been even remotely coercive while dealing with China. You have been a serving diplomat, you have been there, you have done that. Why is it that there is this perception that we are willing to strike, but we are scared to wound the enemy?
No, I don't think that's the correct perception. Maybe some circles in our country maybe have that perception, but I don't think factually that's correct. I think we have managed our affairs dexterously, extremely well. When it comes to dealing with China, it's not as though we want a war with China. We have tried to deal with the border problem, but at the same time also take full advantage of China's rise, and the fact that economically on the trade aspects, we realized that there was certain, given its manufacturing capacity and its advantages in the supply chains, we were willing to import from China because it certainly helped our own internal domestic industries. But I think somewhere we should have been a little bit more alert on how I think we should have diversified our dependence, and particularly in key strategic sectors, whether it comes to, say, the pharmaceutical sector or the telecom sector. And of course, this is a great wake-up call. So actually, out of every evil comes some good. And out of this particular evil, I think the good that has come out is a realization within India that, one, we need to have a holistic approach. Two, that we need to have a strategy. And three, that we need to, I think, diversify our trade dependence, our investment dependence, our strategic dependence, and maybe deal with China both domestically, internally, as well as in partnership with other like-minded countries. And I think we've done it well so far. It's not as though we haven't. You look at any of our recent policies, whether it is neighborhood first or whether it is our Act East policy, that China will try to subvert. Again, this is a point of realization for all of us, that it will try to do so. Is quite obvious that it will do so much more, will be much more aggressive. But I think in our own manner of whether it is in the Indo-Pacific or on the western side of our country, I think we've dealt with it well. I would disagree with your perception that we've been too soft. I think we have calibrated it, and I think we should.
So let me rephrase it. Why is it that we are hesitant about striking strategic alliances, bringing in friends, bringing in allies? We can, we don't need to be self-righteous about it. We can be very cynical while striking these alliances. I'm using the word alliance very loosely, but at least try and create. For instance, I have asked everyone till now, till this conversation, why can't we play a lead role in creating a great wall of democracy as a counter to the Chinese wall of cussedness?
Well, we need to create a great wall. I don't think, of course, democracy is again self-righteous one. We don't need to necessarily stick to it just being a great wall of democracies. Yes, the fact that we inherently remain a democratic country and therefore appeal to other democracies is one important aspect, and we should certainly exploit it to our advantage. I agree with you, but that doesn't mean we should limit it to just that. I think we
No, no,
should,
I'm just saying that was just an example.
as an
That
example. Yeah,
we
and I
have
don't
to
think we can. If you were to look at how we have developed in recent decades our relationship with USA, with Israel, in West Asia, with the countries in the Gulf, in Southeast Asia, with each of the countries, with East Asia, with Japan, with Korea, and I don't think we've been hesitant or self-righteous about anything. I think we have been pretty hard-nosed. In fact, I just mentioned about the Act East policy. The difference between that or the Look East policy was the Look East was a softer version. I think the Act East policy was very clear that there was a strong strategic dimension. And I don't think we've been hesitant about it. It's just that, we are not aggressive and brutal in the way China is, and therefore we perceive to be benign. But that doesn't mean that we have not taken care of our national interests. And I think it's worked very well. I think it's worked to our advantage. And today, I mean, if we are, for example, if you were to ask me about, east of India, East Asia, why is it that, India beckons, but India doesn't threaten? India beckons in a very friendly manner because I think India's involvement and participation in Indo-Pacific, in West, in the Gulf, anywhere, is always considered a very positive factor. And so to that extent, it's worked to our advantage.
How do you see, moving forward, how do you see Quad developing?
Well, the Quad, I think, has evolved well. The initial meetings were really at a joint secretary level. They've also had a foreign secretary, foreign ministers level meeting too. And I think it's a good way to bring together like-minded countries who are committed to a rules-based international order, who are committed to maintaining peace and respecting international law or freedom of navigation and open and free seas, on the Indo-Pacific. So I think to that extent, if countries together can come and ensure these particular principles of a free and open Indo-Pacific, I think we should work towards it and continue to do so.
Okay, and lastly, if you would like to make a statement that sums up your own perception of what are the three things that India needs to do in the next 3 weeks to get moving forward on China?
Well, as I told you earlier, it's not as though, one should be raising the bogey of war. I don't think war is what we want. Certainly, we want a peaceful periphery, and definitely, therefore, peace with China is an important component. And I think already, the fact that, in East Ladakh, there have been discussions by our defense ministry officials and the military on both sides, I think is a good development. I think the EM had a good conversation with their foreign minister. And so I think we should definitely work with China to ensure that peace and tranquility is resumed at the border, but not at the cost of compromising on our sovereignty. And I think that message has gone out very clearly. I think they have brought in their artillery and armory onto the border, and so we are ready. We are ready to tackle it in that context. But beyond the military aspects, I think the most important way to move forward would be to deal with it diplomatically. I think that our Joint Secretary, Naveen Srivastava, has had one conversation. I think that will continue, and I think both sides should work towards it. But I think it's important for China to realize that it will not be back to business as usual. I think there is a price to be paid. Now, already there has been this huge reaction. There is a huge public opinion. And, we are a democracy, so it's come out in public domain. I'm sure, there is a public opinion in China, but you'll never get to know. All we'll get to hear from the Chinese side is what the Global Times chooses to put out. But yes, this relationship has been damaged. And to work towards it, I think they will have to undo what they started first. And that is the first and most important point. And I think we have conveyed that very categorically. We have leverages. The relationship is not just restricted to just the defense aspects. There are several other aspects. There is a political aspect to the relationship. There is an economic aspect to the relationship. There is a people to people aspect of the relationship. There is the soft power aspect of the relationship. And I think we should leverage all of these to ensure that our sovereignty, our territorial integrity, and our national interests are not compromised.
And the third thing?
Well, I thought I already said more than three things, but I thought I said four.
Thank you, Preeti. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule. And we will continue this conversation with other experts. And it was excellent to hear your views on how India should deal with the China conundrum. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Kanchan, and thank you for having me on in your conversation.